to be back in front of you today.
We do miss you when you're gone.
I appreciate that. You didn't say that earlier.
Public arena now.
We're going to talk about global harmonization. I don't know if any of you have heard about global harmonization and kind of heard a buzz, but you know, OSHA, back in the late 70s when OSHA came about, they started a law called the HazCom standard. And it's affectionately known as the right to know law. And basically what OSHA said is that all employees have a right to know what the hazards are of the chemicals that they're working around and how to protect themselves against those hazards. And so that standard has been in place since the early 70s with very few changes. And now they are revising the standard. They are going along with the United Nations, and the world is changing the standard. And it's going to be a globally harmonized system. And OSHA's kind of going in line with that. So with that, obviously there's going to be some changes. And what we're doing today is we're going to talk about those changes. And there's some deadlines to hit to get everybody trained by December 1st of this year. We have to go through what we're going through today. And then the standard doesn't really change, and I'll show you the dates later. There's some key dates when things really start getting kicked off. But the first part of this is going through what we're going to talk about today. I want to explain the training aid that you have in front of you. That is what I want for you to do is, as we go through this, is there's the pictograms that you see. Then you've got the description of the pictograms down below, the numbered items, or the lettered items. And just write the letter next to the number that corresponds with the pictogram, the appropriate pictogram. We're going to talk about the changes to the HazCom standards. We're going to go over the pictograms and talk about those and describe what they are and what they're for. There's 9 new pictograms that we're going to discuss. We're going to talk about the new labeling requirements, which is kind of maybe, when we get to that section, that might be the most important section for us to understand, because as chemical manufacturers start making their changes, we're going to have to know what to expect as they come into us. And then material safety data sheets, as we've always known, MSDSs, are now going to change to what's called, they're taking the M away, they're taking the material off the title. They're going to be safety data sheets, and there's going to be some format changes to those, so we'll talk about those as well. Just to give you an idea about why they're doing this and what this is all about is as you guys know, because you do some global work, there's no consistency out there for chemical manufacturers to provide any kind of consistency. If you go to one of your jobs in Mexico, let's say, you might have some chemicals on site that have labels that you can't even understand. You don't know what they're trying to say. And so in an effort to make global trading an easier prospect, the United Nations came up with this idea to harmonize all this, and so that if a chemical manufacturer puts a label on a chemical in somewhere in Mexico, it should look the same as a chemical manufacturer puts a label in New Jersey. Okay, so we should be able to do trading with other countries, and the information that we have on our containers are the same, so that when it comes in from a foreign country, we should be able to understand what they're doing, and there's consistency. And it makes a lot of sense. I will tell you that even in the United States, there was no consistency. There was no consistency between the Department of Transportation and OSHA even on what's considered a flammable liquid. There were things that and today still things that ship as a flammable liquid by DOT standard, but then once they hit our shop floor, they're not considered a flammable liquid. So there wasn't even consistency within the United States standards. So now this is going to be a system of harmonization with not only other countries, but even our own agencies will have some consistency amongst them. I apologize. Let me. I don't want the animation here. something that, and this is not a change, but the HAZCOM standard was always what's called a horizontal standard. And most OSHA standards are only applied to a relationship between the employer and the employee. And the law said the employer must do this to make the employee safe. And so it was a vertical standard of that relationship. But the HAZCOM standard has always been a vertical standard, or a horizontal standard, excuse me, that it applies not only to that employee-employer relationship, but it also included chemical manufacturers, importers, and distributors. And so it's one of the few laws that had reached out beyond that employer relationship. And that doesn't really change. So even chemical manufacturers and importers, they have obligations and things within this new global harmonized system that they have to do. They have to make the changes to their, as we understand it, SDS could change. Obviously, they're the ones that are having to make those changes and provide the information. Here's some of the key dates. By December 1st of this year, go through the training, like I said, this training that we're doing today. By June 1st of 15, compliance with all the modified provisions of the final rule for chemical manufacturers. And basically what that means is that any new products that they put out has to, by June 1st of that year, any new products have to have the new labeling, the new SDS sheets attached. By December 1st of 15, they can't ship anything out with the old labels. So they could, up until December 1st of 15, they could still have some stuff in the warehouse that's shipping out with old labels. But after December 1st, nothing goes out. And so I really think what you're going to start seeing is sometime next year, you're going to start seeing companies start switching over. And you'll start seeing these new labels come in because they're not going to want to have a big backlog of warehouses full of old labels that they might have to go ahead and spend the money to relabel. So I think you'll start seeing that that we will we'll start having the new labels coming in, and you'll start seeing them next year. What the new standard has categorized the chemical hazards in 3 different categories. And one, they've got health hazard categories, then physical hazard categories, and then they've kind of added something that has never been part of a HAZCOM standard before, but environmental hazard categories. So they're going to classify environmental hazards also. Now the environmental part is the only part that OSHA doesn't really reign over. They still won't have regulatory effects over it, but the global harmonization still has environmental aspects in it, and that's new to the system. So if they're going to classify things with health hazards, physical hazards, environmental hazards, now they're going to throw them into these subcategories of hazards. And the first, going through some of the health hazards, and I'll just read through them. Acute toxicity, skin corrosiveness or irritations, respiratory or skin sensitizers, germ cell mutagens, carcinogenics, reproductive toxicities, specific target organ toxicity. So if it's a chemical that might affect your heart, then it's gonna, or your lungs, it'll be classified under these health hazards. Specific or aspiration hazards and simple asphyxiants. So they're going to classify all of the hazards within one of these categories, and if there is a hazard. So this should be an all-inclusive list of what they're going to consider as health hazards. This is a change, and you guys really, there's a lot of really good things that are happening with this global harmonization that is really going to help a lot of us out. But this is something that's counterintuitive, and it doesn't make good logic to me, but we're going to have to get used to this system. If I showed you the old NFPA diamond, with the red and the white and the yellow and the blue, and it had a 4 in the red diamond, what would that say to you? If there was a chemical out there that had a 4 in the red diamond, what would that say to you?
Stay away from it.
I'm sorry?
Stay away from it.
But it would mean that it's a high hazard in that category, right? And then the red would be the flammability category, so it would be a high hazard flammable chemical. And I would look at that today, that NFPA label, and I would say that 4 means that's highly flammable, okay? Now, everything's reverse of that. So a level 1 hazard is the most hazardous. So when you see on the new labeling system that you've got a level 1, health toxicity, then that's going to be the highest level, not the lowest level. So that's something we're all going to have to get used to. So it's all counterintuitive to me, but so it's the number 1 hazard is the worst hazard, down to a 4 that is going to be the least hazardous. So that's again, when we see a label, and I think this is one of the more dangerous parts of this changeover, is that when we see a label come in and we might see it as a 4 and think, oh, it's no big deal, it's a 4, or vice versa. We might see it as a 1 and say it's no big deal, it's a 1, but really it's telling us it's the highest level of hazard because it's a 1. So that is something, and this information is all going to come from the chemical manufacturers. They're the ones that are going to have to rate these as, and they have come up with a very specific chart based on, if it's a toxicity issue. I mean, they've got this chart that says how long it takes to affect the body and all this stuff, and then based on where it fits into that chart, then it becomes a 1, 2, 3, or 4. So that's a pretty big change for us. Just kind of going through some of the physical hazards now. So we went through, those are the health hazards. Now we're talking about the physical hazards, and those will be all broke down into either explosives, flammable aerosols, oxidizing gases, gases under pressure, compressed gases, liquefied gases, refrigerated liquefied gases, dissolved gases, flammable liquids, flammable solids, self-reactive chemicals, pyrophoric liquids, or solids and gases, and then self-heating chemicals, and chemicals which come in contact with water emit flammable gases. One more page. Oxidizing liquids, solids, organic peroxides, corrosive to metals, and combustible dust. So if that's what the chemical manufacturers, that's their list of physical hazards that they have to determine if their product fits one of those categories. So, and again, it's going to come in on that SDS sheet. You're going to know what it is based on the SDS sheet. You're going to know what it is based on the labeling, and then they're going to rate it based on the 1 through 4 scale. And again, it's counter to that, 1 being the most hazardous.
Scott, I might be getting ahead of you, but in some of those, it's shown also subcategories, A to C or A to D. How does that fit in?
Well, it fits in. It won't be anything that you're going to have to determine, because it'll fit in and it'll be on the labels, and it's all part of the manufacturer's obligations within this to see where it fits in the category. So it might be a category 1, and then it might have a little additional information because it's a subcategory B, and it's things that's stuff that the chemical manufacturers are going to have to deal with, and it will all be evident to you when you read the label and read the SDS sheet. And
Okay, so regardless of whether it's a physical hazard or some other type of hazard, if it's a 1, it's stay away from it. And then
well, I
there might be
mean,
additional information on the subcategory that shows either PPE to be used or stuff like that, or are they going to be used separate?
what PPE to use will be listed on the SDS sheet and in the precautionary statements on the label, which I will get to.
Okay.
Now, just I know you're just kind of saying that as a way to say it, but stay away from it. You're going to have products that are 1s.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you have to stay away from it. It means we need to take precautions to protect ourselves. This is what the new label is going to look like. And a lot of the information on this label will be very similar to what labels have looked like in the past, previously. But there are going to be new things that are on here. And some of the new things are the pictograms, which are these little symbols up here. okay? That's something that, and we'll go through those as well, but that's something that we need to understand what those pictograms are trying to tell us. And then there's going to be a hazard state or a signal word first, danger or warning. Danger is the highest level of hazard, warning would be the next level of hazard. And then there's a hazard statement. So that hazard statement, what it's going to be is it's going to tell me what that pictogram is trying to alert me to. So the first thing I should see is a pictogram, and that pictogram is going to say, you know, I need to explore why that pictogram is telling me that there's a health hazard. And then I'm going to go to the hazard statement, and it's going to tell me specifically what that pictogram is trying to alert me to. And then once I get done with that the hazard statement, then I can go over here to these precautionary statements, and it's going to tell me how to protect myself from the hazards that are here. So the way this label should speak to you, and I'm trying to compare this to, like if we did, going back to that NFPA label, where you can look at that, and there's four diamonds, and they all have a number in them. So almost at a glance, you can tell whether something's hazardous or not. Okay, because if you see a 4 on it, you know that's hazardous. A 3, that's kind of hazardous, you know. So you can glance at it and tell what it is. This label has a similar type of an alert to it, and that's the pictograms. But the pictograms are only going to give you a small picture of what's going on. It's going to tell you that there are hazards you should be concerned with, but it's not going to be very specific. But then I'm going to go to that signal word, and it's going to say danger. Well, now I know that hazard they're trying to tell me about, it's a relatively high hazard. And then I'm going to go to that hazard statement and say, okay, well, that little flame up there is telling me it's highly flammable. That health symbol is telling me that it may cause liver or kidney damage. Okay, so that's telling me there's hazards. Now this is telling me what specifically they are. And again, the precautionary statement now, this is information that we would have had to have gone to the MSDS sheet to before to find. You know, it's going to say highly flammable. Then this is going to tell me how to avoid, you know, ignition of that highly flammable substance. It's going to say may cause liver and kidney damage. And this is going to say how to protect myself and use this product without getting liver or kidney damage. So it's got pictogram, signal word, hazard statement, and then precautionary statements are the new labels. And again, that's a lot of the information is the same in the sense that they still require that the product identifier be on there. They require that, you know, how to get in contact with the supplier. There's going to be some extra information that the company wants you to have on there. But the key information that you need to know are the pictograms and the signal word, hazard statement, and precautionary statements. Are there any questions about this label? It's kind of important that everybody at least knows kind of how to read this label. And I know that you all know how to read, so I'm not trying to insult your intelligence. I just mean what it means.
Where will the 1 through 4 category be shown in there?
It will be on the SDS sheet.
So it won't be on the product label?
Danger is one.
Well,
It's not required to be on. It's not required to be on the label. I'll put it that way. I won't say it won't be on the label.
okay.
That's a lot of information. I'm thinking of a two little talking to make that actually readable.
Well, and if it's a harmonized label, then it should have a background number in it, so that, again, like the brown, at a first glance, you can see, well, how dangerous is it?
Mm-hmm. I don't disagree with you. All I'm telling you is this is what they're requiring on the labels. Now, the manufacturers, what they decide to do on their labels, in addition to what the minimum requirements are, that's yet to be seen. The DOT, as I mentioned, they're also going to go right in line with this, so they're going to change their container labeling. They're going to adopt the new pictograms. Their placards are going to look the same. Their placards will all look the same. They'll have the new pictograms on them. They will still have the same cast numbers and all that they've had to have in the past. They've eliminated a couple of pictograms and added one, or not pictograms, they've added one placard, and that's the environmental hazard, part of the global harmonization. They've eliminated radioactive and biohazard, which those seem like two pretty important placards. I don't know why they eliminated them. I'm going to assume that they're covered somehow, somewhere else in some other way, but maybe they're going to quit allowing us to ship those things. I don't know. Now let's get into the pictograms. There are 9 pictograms, and they're designed to alert you to those 3 categories of hazards: physical, health, and environmental. Okay? I'll go through each one of them. The skull and crossbones means acute toxicity. That makes a lot of sense to us. We're used to thinking skull and crossbones means, toxic. Now the exclamation point, that's the catch-all one. That's the one that's going to kind of have extra information in it. It's going to have, special information that doesn't fit somewhere else in another pictogram, but something that's worthy of alerting. So if I saw this exclamation point pictogram on a label, where am I going to have to go? What should be the next thing I look at to tell me what it's trying to tell me? Well, that hazard statement on the label. So if I see that pictogram, then I'm going to go to that hazard statement. It's going to tell me what hazard it's trying to alert me to. Okay, so that's your big warning, is that there's a pictogram. If there were no hazards at all, there wouldn't be any pictograms. But if there's any hazards, there'll be a pictogram, and then you got to go to that hazard statement to tell what it's trying to tell you. And then the precautionary statement to tell you how to protect yourself from the hazard. Skin corrosiveness, that symbol, they use it for a health hazard and for a physical hazard. So it's corrosive to skin is one way, and corrosive to metals is another way. So it's got a physical hazard assigned to it and a health hazard. And then this Spider-Man guy, that's the one that's going to tell us that there's some kind of a pretty serious health hazard associated. That's going to be for carcinogens, respiratory sensitizers, reproductive toxicities, target organ toxicities, mutagens, and aspiration hazards are all going to fit under that. So when you see that pictogram, that's going to tell you that there's a pretty severe health hazard associated with that. But if you stop there and you don't look beyond that on the label, you're going to have no idea if that's cancer causing or if it's a mutagen, or you've got to go to that hazard statement on that label in order to tell you what that's trying to say. Because that's saying that it's one of these things. Now you got to go to the hazard statement to see which one of these things it is. The exploding bomb, that's for explosives, self-reactives, organic peroxides. Let me ask you something. If we went out on the shop floor right now and we found a chemical that had that picture on it right there, what would you guys think about that chemical? We'd say flammable, right? I mean, that says flammable to us. So this is another thing that's kind of going to be a change, is that symbol, it might mean that it's flammable, but it also might mean that it's self-reactive and not flammable. It also might mean that it's a pyrophoric, or self-heating, or emits flammable gas, or organic peroxide. So again, not to beat a dead horse here, but going back to that label, when we see that, we can't just assume that's saying it's flammable. We have to go to that hazard statement in order to tell us what that's trying to tell us that it is. So there's all these things that are going to fit into that pictogram. Corrosive to metals, we talked about. Gases under pressure, that's what I think it kind of looks like a rolling pin with a missing handle. And then oxidizers, that's an O with flames over it. That's what that's going to mean. And then here, the dead tree, dead fish, those are going to be the environmental hazards. So all of these things, you see a pictogram, that should alert you that there's a hazard, and then you can explore further what the hazard is. talked about the signal word. There's two signal words, danger and warning. Danger is more severe, warning less severe. The hazard statement, we've talked a lot about that already, but examples that might be in that hazard statement is going to tell whether it's a flammable, or whether it's a skin irritator, or it's carcinogenic. So those things will be listed under the hazard statement. The precautionary statement is supposed to be geared towards prevention. How do I prevent myself from exposing this hazard? Response. What do I do if I do get exposed to this hazard? Storage. How am I going to store it properly so this doesn't become a problem because of the hazards? And disposal. Once I've used it, how am I going to properly dispose of it? So that's kind of where those precautionary statements are supposed to focus on: prevention, response, storage, and disposal. The label, we're going to have to get away from this kind of labeling. Okay, which as a safety guy, I've overlooked that type of labeling. I was just happy that they wrote what it was on it, but we're going to have to get away from that. And the new secondary labels are like when you take out of a 5-gallon jug and put it in a smaller container. These are what the requirements are. And I'll preface this by saying that as a company, we need to figure out how we're going to handle the secondary container label before those 2015 deadlines hit. Because it's going to be something that's different. It's not going to be able to take that sticker, that NFPA sticker, slap it on, take a Sharpie, write acetone, and put 4 and 3 and 2 and 0. It's going to be more complicated than that. We're going to have to figure out how we're going to do it. But the secondary container labeling must be consistent with the revised HazCom standard. No conflicting hazard warnings or pictograms. And may use written materials such as signs and placards. So we can get creative. Like HazCom's always been able to say that, if you say all yellow spray bottles are acetone, and that's part of your written policy, and maybe on posters you say yellow spray bottles acetone, blue spray bottles denatured alcohol. If you label it that way, you can still use that, and that's consistent with how it's always been. And then we're going to have, there's probably going to be a lot of manufacturers, a lot of distributors are going to start putting out some pre-made labels for this stuff. And I see a boom in the printer industry and selling printers for these things, little label makers. But that's what the standard says about secondary labels. And again, I don't think George Cook Sons yet has a plan for how we're going to handle secondary labels. It's something we've got to come up with next year. I mentioned that the material safety data sheets have switched to the safety data sheets. And this is probably, to me, one of the most significant positive changes that's come about. If any of you have ever had to read an MSDS sheet, any of you? What did you spend the first 15 minutes doing when you looked at that MSDS sheet? Just probably 15 minutes just to find the section that you needed to read to get the information you're trying to glean. The new SDS sheets, they're all going to be standardized. There's 16 sections on the new SDS sheets, and they're all going to be in the same order. So we know that, for example, if I'm wanting to know what kind of personal protective equipment that I'm going to wear, I know that I can look at that SDS sheet, go to section 8, and it's always going to be in section 8. And that is such a huge positive change. OSHA should have adopted a standardized MSDS sheet long ago. I mean, you could take an MSDS sheet for Windex, and it could be 30 pages long, and you could take another MSDS sheet for a different window cleaner, and it could be 3 pages long. I mean, there's no consistency in information. Now, there's going to be 100% consistency, and you know that every time. First aid, section 4. You know that you're going to go through that. So these are the sections. It's still going to have product identifiers and the hazard identifications, has some ingredients and composition information on it, first aid measures, firefighting measures, accidental release, or what happens if there's a spill, is gonna be on there. Handling and storage. Section 8 is personal protective equipment or exposure controls. Section 9, physical and chemical properties. 10, stability and reactivity. 11, toxicological information. And then 12 through 15, those are all gonna be environmental issues. Those are gonna, like I said, this is new stuff. You won't find an MSDS sheet that's gonna have a lot about environmental issues on it. But now 12, 13, 14, and 15 are all gonna be geared towards the environment. And then section 16 is gonna be the catch-all, other information that the manufacturer wants you to know that didn't have another place to be put. Okay? So it's gonna be the catch-all. That will be the new SDS sheets. They'll be very similar information to a material safety data sheet. They're just gonna be consistently ordered. And they're gonna take a lot of that, I call it chemistry, out of them. They're gonna take a lot of the, when you look at an MSDS sheet, some of those things look like you're taking a chemistry 600 level class, quiz with all the chemistry information that's on them. They're kind of reducing all that and taking a lot of that stuff out that most of us don't use. And they're focusing again on the 3 hazard categories: physical, health, and environmental.
We'll still provide that information, just through some other format?
Yeah, I mean, if there's a need for that information, then I think that, you will be able to get it. It just won't be on this. And some manufacturers might decide to put that in section 16, but they're just not gonna have a lot of that data that most of us don't understand yet. Are there any questions about the SDS sheets in the order? I'm telling you, as a safety guy that's had to look at lots of MSDS sheets, this is a big deal. This is gonna make a lot of people's lives a lot easier. Are there any questions about any of this? It's not complicated what the changes are, and it's just important that some of those key things like the reverse logic numbering system, that we understand that level 1 is the highest hazard. Understanding the pictograms and what they mean, and knowing that we can't just assume, like using that flames one as an example, we can't just assume that we see that it's flammable, because it could be telling us it's one of those other physical hazards that are listed. So those are some things that are, going to be different in our minds when we see these new labels coming in. Yes?
Have any of the new SDS sheets come out yet? Have any of the new SDS sheets come out yet?
I don't really know. They're not required to yet. I know that some of my customers, have some SDSs they have to prepare for some of their products, and they're feverishly working on getting these put together. I would venture to say that, again, as the new labels start coming out, you'll probably see manufacturers starting to go to the new SDS format as well.
So the book we keep on file here at Cook, we just have to keep changing them out as the manufacturers give us the new ones.
Yes. Yes.
I think we're gonna have to keep this separate book.
A new book, a new
We're
book.
gonna start getting mixed up. An MSDS and an SDS book, side by side, or just stacked until the transition dates happen.
Yeah. And then those MSDSs, I would archive those for a few years, and hold on to them for a little while.
Do you know what or if any time frame is gonna be allowed for vendors to have to have the new SDS sheets available and distributed?
Well, just those this June 1st, let's go back to that.
2015?
Greg, it doesn't really say that there's a date that they have to make those available. They give these dates that they have to start sending them out, but there's not a date that they have to make them available in addition to these changeover dates. So, by December 1st, they can't ship containers labeled with the chemical manufacturer import unless it has a GHS label. So December 1 of 15, that's probably the date that you're thinking, the trigger date.
If the label refers to the SDS sheet, and you're gonna have to refer to that to know everything about it, then they have to have it out.
Well, and this is saying that it, by June 1st of 15, they have to be in compliance with all the modified provisions. So that is the date that, the drop dead date for them to start having all of the compliance with this. So that, I guess maybe the June 1st date is the date that you can start counting on that they're gonna have, start shipping products. But you're asking me a little bit of a different question, because you're kind of talking about maybe like a product you already have on hand that you need to be able to get a new SDS sheet for. Not something that's newly shipped to you, but maybe something you've had on stock. in
Yeah,
stock
I'm
for a
asking
while.
for the date when a vendor ships us stuff with an MSDS sheet. What date should we expect it to now come with an SDS sheet?
And I would say that June 1st of 15 date. But that doesn't answer that, like, let's say you have a 55-gallon drum of a product and you're not ordering a new one, so there's nothing to trigger the manufacturer to send a new SDS sheet to you. And so when that would be available, I guess that would still be that June 1st deadline. I think they're gonna start becoming available way sooner than that, but that's the date that they have to start shipping. Any other questions?
What if you had well, that's if somebody ships something to you, but what if you have something on hand that has been sitting out there for, you use small increments, but you have a large volume. You have it labeled the old way,